kind of go around the horn doing that. There's a very good chance, if it's like any of the other webinars I've done, we won't be able to answer all of the questions in the session. So I definitely encourage everybody to stick around for a little bit afterwards for the networking, so that you can continue talking to all these great panelists. So to begin with, I'm going to introduce Balaji, who has kind of been in and around this space for many years, working at Ebonic, at Stryker, I believe now at a new venture, but kind of has been practicing in this biomaterials and medical devices kind of space for quite some time. So you'll be giving the first presentation, and I'll let you continue introducing yourself and take it away.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for the introduction. I hope you can see my screen.
Yep.
Perfect. Hello, Balaji Prabhu. I've been one of the few fortunate people who's been, I would call a generalist, having been working with 3D printing in metals, ceramics, bioresorbable polymers, stable polymers, in orthopedics, in spine, and now more so in the dental space for Dentsply Sirona. So what I thought today was, since we have a very strong elite panelists of technical presentations following up, to give a perspective overview in terms of the biomaterials that are used in the 3D printing space. With that, the amount of biomaterials that we can look at in the different spaces, whether it's medical products, surgical planning, prosthetics, implants and surgical guides, bioprinting, or personalized pills, we've seen a rapid advancement, especially with COVID, with 3D printed masks or swabs that are used for the COVID tests. Surgical planning, which is very well pronounced, is a tool that is really rapidly advancing and enabling pre-surgical planning for especially removing tumors and some of the complex congenital defects that you see over there. Prosthetics with materials such as polyamides, for example, that are used in various hands or legs or amputees, especially when you look at all the veterans coming back. This is a very critical area of specialization for 3D printed materials. Also now fast advancing is customized or personalized hearing aids. But the area that I would like to focus today is my area of specialization, especially with the implants. I've kind of also included the surgical guides in there. But between the implants and the bioprinting, this forms one of the, I would say, more advanced and complex biomaterial space, because now you're looking at class 2, class 3 devices, which carry a lot of risk, and which biomaterials, whether it's leaching or carcinogenicity effects, are going to be very key. But also I wanted to bring to focus and attention personalized pills. A few years ago, we had the first 3D printed pills for epilepsy. These materials that are used in these pills also carry some of the biomaterials as the base material agents. So I also wanted to bring that up. There is a definite intercorrelation between what we use in the medical space to what is being developed in the personalized medicine space as well. The key to 3D printing medical devices starts with the biomaterial, unlike the other fields such as aerospace or automobiles. The reason being the biomaterial needs to be biocompatible and needs to be safe until it performs the function that is intended to. And if it's left in the body, it should still be considered safe. So this makes it one of the key challenges in designing as well as developing a biomaterial. If you look at the whole biomaterial landscape, when you plot a Young's modulus or stiffness, you can see that the ceramics that are in yellow, much stiffer but brittler. The metals, titanium and cobalt chrome, which are pretty strong, but they're way too strong for your cortical bone, resulting in stress shielding. Now, when you move into materials that are very similar to the bone, like a PEEK, for example, however, these materials do not have the same strength as the metal. So you always have to find this compromise in terms of finding the right material depending on the fine end device. But an area that I want to bring attention today is forms. I will continue to use this indication, input material. This is where most people do not spend time or attention, but it ends up becoming more expensive. you got to take some of these materials, whether it's a titanium powder or a PEEK filament or a magnesium wire or bioinks loaded with cells or polymer materials. You need to develop these input materials or forms, which is what will decide how successful your final 3D printing is going to look like. If you take the whole 3D printing web, it's not that easy. Between the metals, the composites, the ceramics, the hydrogels or bioinks, and the polymers, each of them carry a specific area of 3D printing that needs to be well understood and also optimized. For example, the same powder bed fusion that is used for SLM in metals is going to be the same powder bed fusion that you're going to use in the SLS in the polymers, but it's not going to be a straight shoot. Even the powders are going to be different. This brings us, where is all these heading? What does the current trend look like? I'm going to share a perspective FDA approval direction for the various printing technologies, the device types, and the printing material. Give your focus to the outermost ring here, that is in blue. It's the printing technology. And this is a few years old, but still holds good for this general direction. In terms of the printing technology, the powder bed fusion, which basically contains the SLM and the EBM, is almost 83% of the approved devices. And you can see closely following behind this is the SLAs, typically coming from the dental space. And this is the reason also the device type that is being approved primarily is in the orthopedic space. And as you can see here between the hip and the knees, this is a pretty rapid advancement followed by the spine. When you look at the printing material, which is in red, you can clearly see a clear distinction between the titanium alloy and the polymers. Now, these titanium alloys primarily go into the SLM or SLS, SLM-based techniques, E-beam-based techniques, whereas the polymers primarily go into the surgical guides, especially for the dental side of things. What this clearly gives us is, even though there are more than 100, now this is even though a few years old, a few hundred devices that are already approved, clearly the powder bed fusion is one of the key leading techniques in there, closely followed by the SLA DLP techniques, where orthopedic is a clear ahead of the game in terms of approvals, followed by closely by the surgical guides. If you look at the Autonomous Manufacturing 3D Printing Society, they plotted that between the expected growth and the stage, the number of medical devices that are getting approved compared with what is commercialized in the other segments, medical is far more advanced when it comes to the early mainstream. And this is quite surprising. You would think so. In my opinion, I thought probably aerospace or automobile would be far exceeding, but this is also giving us a good indication how rapidly the med device space or medical space for 3D printing is evolving. So what I did was I did a perspective opinionated plot, if you want to say that. If you look at the applications, plotted the same way. The orthopedics, the dental, the spine are all in the first early mainstream. The dental is a little bit more ahead than the orthopedics, primarily because these have chair-side polymers that are today being printed by the dentist in their offices, and with all the surgical guides that are out there and the mold flows, where you have this tissue engineering based spectrum that is rapidly evolving, and which I will also give a closer look. If you want to look at the material plot between the dental polymers, the orthopedic metals, the spine, which very similarly mimics the orthopedic space, then you have, again, this whole noisy spectrum that you are looking at between the resorbables and the composites that are coming into the mainstream commercialization. We have bioinks from hydroxyapatite. We have bioinks coming out of for the cellular regeneration, as well as collagen that Nadav will speak to today. These are starting to come up slowly but surely into the mainstream. And this is very interesting because this crowded space is very rapidly going to move into the mainstream very soon, depending on the clinical and the regulatory success. Just taking stabbing into orthopedics, the first orthopedic hip devices were approved in 2007. Why I wanted to show this was the same titanium-based material. You have two different technologies: the selective laser sintering, the E-beam, which is much more heat source based on the electron beam source. But as you can clearly see here, the powder size varies just for the same hip implant design. The powder size varies, which also results in a change in the finished product as well as the residual stresses. So this basically also shows us that even though you have the same material, for example, in this case, titanium-based powder, with two different technologies, you got to have to optimize them. And this is also for the most mature orthopedic space. With the spine space, which is quite interesting, because now we have polymer entrants coming in. We have the same E-beam and SLM, but we also have what Scott will talk to today, the polyaryl ether ketones or polyether ketone family. We have PEEK, polyether ether ketone, and we also have a silicon nitride material. And again, when you look at this, all three materials, for example, use the powder bed fusion base where you need the powder as the input material, whereas PEEK is rapidly advancing with filaments that are nothing but spaghettis, solid spaghettis that are about a 1.75 millimeter or 3 millimeter in diameter. We also have silicon nitride slurries that are today free-form casted. So this is a unique space in itself, which focuses on fusion, because the first devices, 3D printed devices, were just recently approved a few years ago in 2018. But definitely here again, the SLM clearly is a leading technology, closely followed by free-form fabrication or FDM. But definitely polymers are starting to advance, catching up with the titanium 3D printed. This is not a bat hanging inverted, but this is one of the dentures that are 3D printed. This is from Dentsply Sirona. What you see here is a liquid resin, photocurable resin, that is 3D printed using the carbon DLP-based continuous 3D printing technology. This is very unique in itself, where oxygen is continuously monitored and tapped onto so that you're able to print customized dentures. You also see, for example, in this particular case, powder bed fusion dental frameworks. Now, these dental frameworks are also 3D printed, which are permanently implanted, on top of which some of these dentures could also be permanently implanted. We have the liners that are used. Gone are the days, in the future, we will not see any metal braces. We also see the surgical guides. This gives us a very unique industry. As I mentioned in the beginning, the dental space is a little bit more advanced in the fact that similar to point of care printing, chairside printing is becoming the key and will continue to drive, where the dentist is able to scan when you're in your dentist office right away. And then as they are fixing and working on your teeth, some of the devices for you are printed in the room next door, and then it's fitted right away. So this is where the industry is heading towards. But one of the key indicators is the SLA and the DLP-based technologies, which is why the photocurable polymers and crosslinkers form one of the key bases for the dental space. Jumping right on to bioprinting. Here you see a video from Dimension X. It's a cool video in the sense that what we are printing here, what they're printing there is a calcium phosphate ceramic. Typically ceramics are brittle, but this particular ceramic is very flexible. They call it the fluffy, I believe. This opens up new doors for the hard to soft tissue engineering in terms of binding that gap where ceramics are brittle materials. When you look at the softer materials, that now we are starting to move from the metals down into the softer materials. Typically in bioprinting, you have these softer polymers or hydrogels loaded with cells based on the nativity of the tissue that you would be placing the device, along with the crosslinker, which forms the core bio ink. Sharing with you some of the polymer backbones typically used for inkjet or FDM or extrusion-based PLLA, alginate, and PCL, which is polycaprolactone resorbable materials, along with some of the key bio ink materials such as collagen, gelatin, alginates, and hyaluronic acid. The challenge with the bio inks, as we continue, as the community continues to develop, is maintaining the structural integrity as well as the vascularization, maintaining the stability post printing of the cells. So there is still a lot of work that is ongoing, but definitely this sets the stage for the type of material that you're looking at in terms of developing these bio ink materials. Again, sharing a few applications, novel applications. what companies like Rocket in South Korea are doing are taking the autologous tissues from our own body, and after processing them as bioink, using in different printers so that they can be used for diabetic foot ulcers. Today, the foot ulcer basically has a polyurethane pad, for example, or a gauze that you end up taking it out. But you may end up putting these foot ulcers pads that might just grow into the skin. And this is a short video of the technology that Rocket uses. It's a proprietary extrusion inkjet technology that they're able to print these foot ulcer pads that could be resorbed into the body using the body's own tissue cells. Jumping next into another cool aspect is fluid form. They basically use a fresh bioprint technology where a collagen and an alginate are used as the binding material. What you can see here is the 3D printed material. The printing is actually done in a bath, an alginate bath. You can clearly see arteries that are being produced, and once they're produced, they are dissolved with the alginates being washed away, leaving behind a nice 3D printed material. Again, what I like about this technology is also the fact that collagen that Nada will also be speaking about are printed using this particular spectrum, which is unique, and the fact that this could also print in a Z-axis. Another interesting technology is typically we see breast implants with silicones and some of the issues. But some of the recent advancements by companies like Belasano in Germany, where once the needed scan is completed, a scaffold is made using a resorbable material, for example. And again, here, similar, the tissue from and fat own body cells can be used to trigger growth of these breast implants tissue regeneration. And this is why this is in a clinical phase. This is an example of a extrusion-based 3D printed breast device that Belasano from Germany has developed. Again, a very cool yet advancing technology. It's in the clinical phase studies right now. This all leads us to the final closing sets of information. What I'm sharing here is the landscape, the bioprinting landscape. What you see here in the green boxes are all the different 3D technologies. For example, the pneumatic material extrusion here. You have the free form or fresh printing right here. You have the magnetic 3D printing right here. But each of these, again, opens up into multiple sub platforms. And what you see in the outermost boxes are the number of startups and companies that are actively focused in this space. It's amazing to see the amount of advancement that is happening, primarily driven by the open sourceness of the 3D printing. If you look at it a decade or 2 decades ago, our 3D printing was restricted in a closed space, especially in the med devices, because the technology was limited to a few providers. Today, with the open source or the extrusion-based technologies, many companies or many research centers are developing their own 3D printers, which essentially means that this opens the space into far more advancements and rapid advancements, which leads me to my final closing slide. That opens up, similar to the Androids and the Apples of the world, we are starting to see rapid developments in biomaterials as well as 3D printing technologies. This can result in synthetic skin, for example, coming out of Rocket, for example, using collagen or polycaprolactone. You have blood vessels that have been actively researched from Brigham's Hospital, as well as in the University of California, San Diego. The key is loading them post-extrusion 3D printing or DLP-based 3D printing by keeping the cells active. Now, that is the key challenge. You have from Wake Forest, some of the early pioneers where they're able to print the scaffolds using a bioresorbable material, using inkjet-based technology, and then loading it with cells. You have a mini heart this was one of the first functional mini hearts coming out of Israel, using personalized hydrogel, using the body's own hydrogel-based systems, as well as the cornea coming out of sodium alginate and metacrylates. And this is another crowded space that is starting to become heart valves. Again, multiple materials are being investigated, such as Alivi's collagen ink, as well as silicone from Zurich. And This is another interesting developments with the WIS Institute in Harvard. This is a beating heart, which contains a gelatin printed using embedded 3D printing. This all is opening up a lot of spaces. I'm just only shown a few, but the most important is where do we go to the next frontier? Is also 4D printing, where time becomes a variable, where the video that you'll see here, for example, a 3D printed hydrogel with time is able to activate its shape. This could be also for smart materials.